In the early summer months of 1999, about 2.5 years after the killing, Scott Falater's facing the death penalty in a crime that he says he committed, but he's not responsible for.
In Phoenix this morning, testimony resumes in the bizarre murder trial of Scott Falater, an otherwise mild-mannered engineer. Falater admits stabbing his wife 44 times and then holding her head underwater in their swimming pool until she died. But faced with first-degree murder charges, this father of two insists he's not guilty.
Juan Martinez had a pretty slam-dunk case. He had an eyewitness.
I saw a person laying on the ground.
He had damning evidence.
And everyone in the courtroom is wondering what on earth will Scott Falater's defense be?
I didn't see what our defense was going to be. We know he did it. And then the question was, what caused it?
When we first went in and met the attorney, he had been planning to plead Scott as guilty but mentally insane.
What did you think of that?
Oh, I was outraged. I was outraged. No. I said, my brother is not an insane person. There's no way you could prove that he's insane.
Scott's mother and sister are racking their brains trying to figure out what went wrong. How could this be? When they remember that Scott used to sleepwalk as a child.
As I sat and thought about it, I remembered several instances where he did walk in his sleep. And I mentioned that to Laura.
So I got on the internet and got as much information together as I could before I meet with the attorney. And didn't talk to Scott about this at all, mostly because we wanted to be sure that this was a certain possibility, because it sounded so ridiculous.
I was willing to consider it. Then you wanted to know, did he have a history where there was sleepwalking? And Scott did.
There were several times he came down the stairs, fully dressed, and walked into the living room, and he was all ready for school, and it was like midnight. Then one time he came down the stairs, and he was probably over 15 or 16, and he was stark naked. And the next day, you'd ask him about it or talk to him about it, he had absolutely no idea that this happened.
And it was kind of a family joke. It wasn't any big deal. But his sister recalled a time he was violent during a sleepwalking episode.
I was 20 years old, just a month or so before I was getting married. I was going through finals in college, and I guess it was a stressful time.
He went to bed early that night. I stayed up. I was watching The Tonight Show.
Are you really applauding me or the fact that you don't live in Buffalo?
And he came walking out kind of behind me. And I said, Scott, what are you doing? He didn't answer me. And then he started walking toward the back door.
She thought, oh, he's sleepwalking. So she ran in front of him to lock the door leading out from the kitchen to the outside.
When I did that, I brushed against his shoulder, and he turned around and he grabbed me by my shoulders and just tossed me.
And she said, I just picked her up and threw her across the kitchen. I don't remember that incident at all.
He looked just so angry. He looked almost demonic. He just was, I have never seen him look like that, never.
Was that the only time you can remember Scott being violent with you or anyone?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. It was about 2 months before he and Yarn were going to get married. He was getting ready for either midterms or finals at school. He was under a lot of stress. He just looked really tired. He would get circles around his eyes.
Experts don't know exactly what causes an episode in those prone to sleepwalking, but almost all sleep experts agree that stress and sleep deprivation can trigger sleepwalking episodes in those with sleep disorders.
My father's job at the time that my mother passed, he was working on a product for Motorola. He had a team of engineers, and I think he had come to the conclusion that the product wasn't going to succeed and that they might have to just scrap it and start over and start somewhere new.
And he was extremely concerned about how this would affect the well-being of his crew, of his staff.
He had a seminary class he was teaching 6 in the morning. He was spread very thin.
The defense tried to say that this was not Scott Falater acting consciously, that this was a monster emerging from the depths of his unconscious, an irrational, inexplicable eruption of a man who had come under enormous pressure, that his life had become a pressure cooker.
Sleepwalking is triggered by stress when a person can be under a great deal of stress, and it can also be triggered by sleep deprivation when you're very tired or just worn out.
I never bought the defense of killing while he was, sleepwalking or asleep.
Not to sound flippant, but I kind of smirked. I'm like, are you kidding me? Sleepwalking?
The actions during an episode are often illogical and somewhat nonsensical.
Really? This is kind of like almost hand in the cookie jar type thing. You got caught, dude.
The behavior isn't voluntary without intent.
And I just thought, it's a bunch of bull.
The level of consciousness is impaired. The evidence is also clear that he was the one that stabbed, but he did it without any conscious thought. He did it without awareness because he was sleepwalking.
From Times Square in New York, Diane Sawyer and Charles Gibson.
Good evening and welcome to 2020 Wednesday.
The case is big news. 2020 actually devoted multiple segments to it.
Well, what do you think of this as a defense strategy for killing a spouse? An Arizona man set out to convince a jury that he stabbed his wife 44 times while sleepwalking and doesn't remember a thing.
It got a lot of attention. It was a front page story. People were talking about it because it required and was based upon an attempt to penetrate the mysteries of the human mind and the privacy of an American family that apparently was living the American dream.
The jury was faced with an astonishing question. Did Scott Falater kill his wife in his sleep?
Scott himself initially said he thought that that was a crazy notion.
Inside, I just felt it was a bunch of BS. It was just very simple and pure BS, and it had no basis in reality. I am an engineer. I knew there were tests that could be done in a hospital which would prove it with numbers. And so I was going to wait for those tests, which would tell me for sure.
See what happens when Scott goes to sleep with a camera watching.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.